So first off, I'm sorry for part 2 getting to you guys much later than I originally said. I thought I would have a lot more free time during the holidays, and I was very wrong. So again, I apologize, but without further ado, let's get into it. At number 50, we've got the 1969 to 1970 New York Knicks. Now this is, without question, one of the greatest Knicks teams of all time. They had a 60-22 record throughout the regular season. They were the best defense in the entire league that year, while also being a top 5 team offensively. They did end up beating Wilt Chamberlain, Jerry West, and Elgin Baylor in the NBA Finals in a 7-game series. Now, the one knock you can say about this team is that they did go to multiple 7 games in the NBA playoffs, so maybe it wasn't the most convincing or the most dominating postseason run, but without question, their roster was extremely deep and extremely talented. They had 3 players on their team in Walt Frazier, Willis Reed, and Dave DeBusschere, who were all first team all defense. And there's very few teams in NBA history who have done that. One of those are the 95-96 Bulls, who you will see later on in this video. They also had the MVP of the league in Willis Reed, who was averaging about 22 points and 14 rebounds that season, and his teammate, Walt Frazier, who's one of the greatest two-way point guards in the history of the league, actually finished 4th in the MVP running that year. So again, this team was just stupid talented. It was the glory days of the New York Knicks. It's debatable whether if this was their best Knicks team from the 1970s decade, but they definitely have a case. So yeah, they'll have to settle for the number 50 spot on this list. Number 49, we've got the 1965 to 1966 Boston Celtics. Now obviously on this top 100 list, we've been seeing a lot of teams from the 1960s Celtics, from that era, for obvious reasons. They just utterly dominated, and this was one of the better ones. They had a 54-26 record throughout the regular season. They ended up beating the Los Angeles Lakers with Elgin Baylor and Jerry West as their star tandem in the NBA Finals in a competitive 7-game series. Now, you all know about the roster. I've talked about him a lot in part 1. You had Bill Russell doing his thing. He actually finished 4th in the MVP running this year, and his teammate Sam Jones, who led the team in scoring at 23.5 points per game, he actually finished 5th in the MVP running that year. But they had a lot more than that. John Havlicek was just at the age of 25, and he was doing his thing. Tom Sanders was great as well. Don Nelson was a major player for this roster. And so yeah, one of the greatest teams of the 60s decade for sure. I would say they're either top 2 or top 3, but there's definitely going to be a higher 60s Celtics team on this list. But for me, I've got them at the 49th spot. Number 48, the 1949 to 1950 Minneapolis Lakers. You don't see many teams from this decade, but this was one of the best 1950s teams without question. These Lakers went 51-17, so they utterly dominated the regular season. If you obviously adjust that to an 82-game schedule, then they have a much better record. On top of that, they utterly dominated the 1950 playoffs. They beat the Rochester Royals in a 1-game series, so that right there tells you how different the 50s were. Then in the divisions finals, they swept the Fort Wayne Pistons 2-0. And then in the NBA Finals, finally, they got a postseason loss, and they ended up defeating the Syracuse Nationals in a 6-game series. Who were they led by? Well, you guys all know. The first great big man in NBA history, George Mikan, who was averaging 27.4 points per game out of his team's 84 points per game that year. Mikan is doing a lot of heavy lifting for this team, but they also had Vern Mickelson, they have Jen Pollard, so they did have some talent on this team, but, obviously we're not really comparing like talent for talent, against one another. It's more about how they dominated their era, and specifically, this team really dominated not just the regular season, but the postseason as well. So for me, they're going to be number 48. Number 47. We've got the 2009 to 2010 Los Angeles Lakers. Now, this Lakers team did not dominate the regular season as much as they did the year prior, as they finished that year with a 57-25 record. With that being said, Phil Jackson, Kobe, Pau Gasol, and Ron Artest, all of their eyes were set on the NBA playoffs and on the NBA Finals. And when they got there, they did their job. They took out a young and talented OKC team in the first round in 6 games. Then they swept the Utah Jazz in the second round. And then in the Western Conference Finals, they took out the Phoenix Suns, who were led by Steve Nash. And that was that iconic moment where Kobe was hitting those ridiculous shots over Grant Hill and various defenders. And then, smacks Alvin Gentry on the butt. And then against the Boston Celtics, even while Kobe's got a broken index finger on his shooting hand, he leads his Lakers to beat the Celtics in the 7-game series. And so I do not think that this was technically the more talented Lakers team between the 2009 team and the 2010 team, but they were the better team to play physical basketball with those Boston Celtics, especially because they had Ron Artest on the team. Then you had Lamar Odom coming off the bench, who was a 6th Man of the Year candidate. Kobe was not only an MVP candidate, but a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. And I think Pau Gasol had toughened up a lot from the previous year as well. And so definitely one of the greatest teams of all time. But for me, they're high 40s. Number 46, I've got the 1993 to 1994 Houston Rockets. Now, this was the first of the Rockets' back-to-back NBA championships. They were much more dominant in the regular season as they won 58 games and lost 24. On top of that, they did actually go to 2 Game 7s in the NBA playoffs. The other 2 series were only a 4-game series and a 5-game series. And so it was a bit of a mixed bag in the postseason. But with that being said, Hakeem Olajuwon was doing his thing. He didn't really have a second star at this point. It would be the following season that they would acquire Clyde Drexler in a mid-season trade. But still, it was a talented team around Hakeem as the lone superstar, and it was one of the first teams to really take advantage of, a centerpiece on the offense who's surrounded by an array of shooters, guys like Robert Horry and guys like Kenny Smith and Mario Elie. They also had, an absolute defensive dog in Vernon Maxwell, and Otis Thorpe was a nice big as well, who also, provided some solid defense down low. And so this overall was a really, really good team, although you could certainly argue that they were lacking, a second superstar who could really step in and help out Hakeem Olajuwon when he needed it. But they won the championship without it, as Hakeem was the MVP of the league this year, the Defensive Player of the Year this year, and obviously went on to be the Finals MVP as well. Number 45, the 1987 to 1988 Los Angeles Lakers. Now, some of you might be hearing this and thinking, wow, this is a very low ranking for a Showtime Lakers team, especially considering that just the year prior, the 1987 Lakers are widely considered as one of the greatest teams of all time. Well, absolutely. I agree with with most of your logic. The problem is, nothing came easy for this team, like basically nothing. They had a strong regular season with a 62-20 record, but in the playoffs, they had the first round, and after that, it was just dogfight after dogfight after dogfight. So they swept the San Antonio Spurs in the first round, 3-0, and then after that, they went to 7 games against John Stockton and Karl Malone of the Utah Jazz. After that, they went to 7 games with Mark Aguirre and the Dallas Mavericks. And then after that, they went to 7 games with Isaiah Thomas and the Detroit Pistons. And so 3 straight NBA playoff series where they went to 7 games. And so they were fortunate just to win the NBA championship, let alone be considered as one of the greatest teams of all time. Obviously, you had Magic Johnson, was still at the height of his powers. James Worthy was also just a wonderful co-star. But at this point, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is starting to decline. He's 40 years old, and he's averaging less than 15 points per game. Byron Scott is one of the leading scorers as well. And as usual, Michael Cooper is a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. So it is still a very great Showtime Lakers team, but at this point they're starting to get a little bit older in their run, seeing how Kareem is, knocking on retirement's door at this point. And unlike some of their earlier years where they won the championship this decade, just nothing came easy for them. So they'll have to settle for the 45th spot on my list. Number 44. I've got the 2007 to 2008 Boston Celtics. And guys, I'm not going to lie, I wanted to rank these guys a lot higher. I feel like when they first won the NBA championship, I thought this was like a top 25 greatest team of all time. But that take hasn't really aged well. Now, when they talk about themselves, Kevin Garnett Paul Pierce, Rajon Rondo. Those guys seem to think that they're still one of the greatest teams of all time. But kind of similarly to what I just talked about with the 1988 Los Angeles Lakers, nothing came easy for these 2008 Boston Celtics. So yes, they did have the greatest improvement, year-to-year improvement in NBA history for a season, as they went 66-16 in the regular season. They did have the number one defensive rating that year, and that, I think the majority of the credit goes to Kevin Garnett for being that year's Defensive Player of the Year. Just such a great defensive leader and great communicator. But in the playoffs, it was a lot more competitive. In the first round against the overachieving Atlanta Hawks, they went to 7 games. And then in the second round against LeBron James and a young Cleveland Cavaliers squad, they also went to 7 games. Then in the Eastern Conference Finals against Detroit, it took 6 games. And then in the NBA Finals against the Los Angeles Lakers, who were not completely healthy, by the way, they also went to 6 games. So again, it was, one of the toughest playoff runs that an NBA championship team has ever had to go through, basically, in order to win a title. So you got to love what they had. Paul Pierce, Ray Allen spreading the full floor and hitting clutch three-point shots, and then obviously defensive leader of Kevin Garnett. They also had Glenn, Big Baby Davis, and Sam Cassell, was in the twilight of his career making an impact. And of course, one of my favorite players of all time, even as a Lakers fan, a young Rajon Rondo. And so this Celtics team was solid, but I don't feel like you really should be ranking them much higher, given the fact that how are you going to call them greater than some of the teams on this list when they struggled, to beat the 2008 Atlanta Hawks in a 7-game series in the first round, And so for that reason, they're really limited on how high they can be on this list. Number 43, I've got the 2004 to 2005 San Antonio Spurs. Now, this Spurs team, obviously led by the all-time great head coach, Greg Popovich. They went 59-23 throughout the regular season, and throughout the Western Conference playoffs, which was still a strong conference at that point, they never went further than 6 games. They beat the Denver Nuggets in the first round, 4-1. Then they beat the Seattle Supersonics in 6 games in the semifinals. And then in the conference finals against a very strong Phoenix Suns team who was led by the MVP of the league, Steve Nash, they beat them in 4-1, so a gentleman's sweep there. Then their first serious challenge was the 2005 NBA Finals against the Detroit Pistons, who were the defending champions, up until the Spurs eliminated them in 7 games. Tim Duncan was doing his thing as always. On top of that, obviously you had the iconic 3, where you had Tony Parker leading from the point, and then you had Manu Ginobili coming off the bench doing his thing as well, as he was an all-star this year. And a guy who usually doesn't get enough respect who was on this team was Bruce Bowen. And in 2005, Bruce Bowen was not only first-team all-defense, but he was the Defensive Player of the Year runner-up, which was 2 spots ahead of Tim Duncan that year. So yeah, this was a really, really great squad, and you could even argue that they'd be higher, and I'd respect that opinion. Number 42, you've got the 1999 to 2000 Los Angeles Lakers. Now, this Lakers team, when you're looking just strictly at the regular season, they could be much, much higher up on this list, because the Shaq and Kobe Lakers went 67-15 throughout the regular season. With that being said, another case of things being much, much tougher in the NBA playoffs, starting off with their rivals in the first round, the Sacramento Kings. At that time, the first round of the NBA playoffs was a best-of-5 series, and the Lakers barely beat the Kings 3-2. Then they knocked out the Phoenix Suns in the second round 4-1. Then Western Conference Finals against the Portland Trail Blazers, they very nearly got eliminated on that stage, as they were trailing the Blazers by as much as, I believe, 17 points in that Game 7. But as you guys all know, there was the iconic comeback that, was just capped off with a lob from Kobe to Shaq. And so they do go on to beat the Indiana Pacers in the NBA Finals 4-2, but it wasn't easy. Kobe had the ankle roll in those NBA Finals, but then he had the clutch performance in Game 4. Shaq was the MVP of the league that year, and he was also second in the Defensive Player of the Year that year as well. Shaq also led the league in scoring. and he was one vote away from being the first unanimous MVP in NBA history, something he still hasn't forgotten to this very day. With that being said, there was a lot of drama that year for that Lakers team. Some people don't think Glenn Rice was ever the right fit as the Lakers' third scoring option. Some people still think it was a mistake to trade away Eddie Jones for Glenn Rice. I'm not sure if I felt that way. I always thought Glenn Rice was a good fit for this team, especially when the defenses collapsed upon Shaq and Shaq was able to kick it out to his perimeter shooters. But something else that's worth mentioning is at this point, Kobe's only 21 years old and he's averaging 22 points per game. So he hadn't quite got to that point where he was a legitimate superstar. I don't think that really happened until 2001. So although this was still a great Lakers team, they had a really tough time getting it done, with 2 NBA playoff series that went down to the wire. And on top of that, Kobe's just not quite on that level where he's, at a peer level with Shaq just yet. And so for that reason, they're definitely lower on the list compared to their other three-peat years. Number 41, we've got the 1997 to 1998 Chicago Bulls. Now, some people are going to hear this and are immediately going to start critiquing me for it, thinking that I'm just crazy for having a Michael Jordan-led Chicago Bulls team this low. And yes, they did have a 62-20 record. Yes, Phil Jackson was the coach. And yes, Michael Jordan was the MVP of the league and eventually the Finals MVP as well. With that being said, there is no question in my mind that the 96 Bulls and the 97 Bulls were way better than the 1998 Chicago Bulls. Because if you've seen The Last Dance and if you remember the details of it, you'll probably remember a couple of these aspects. For one, Scottie Pippen was dealing with injuries throughout the year, was getting, was recovering on company time. On top of that, by the time he gets to the NBA Finals, Scottie's not even healthy. Like, he's out there on the court as a decoy because his back is so jacked up. On top of that, Dennis Rodman didn't even start in a single game of the NBA Finals because at that point, Dennis Rodman is in his high 30s, so he's not nearly as good as he once was. So Michael Jordan, yes, he has some talented players around him in a decoy and Scottie and in an old Dennis Rodman. Then he's got Tony Kukoc and Steve Kerr and Ron Harper. But a lot of these guys were up there in their ages and were dealing with injuries. So Michael really had to carry the offense for this team. Just in Game 6 of the NBA Finals alone, Michael Jordan had to score 45 of the team's 87 points just to win that championship. And so, yeah, this was a good Bulls team, but compared to their prior years, they're not even close. And the amount of weight Michael Jordan had to carry had to do with a lot of weaknesses of this team. So for that reason, they're not making it into my top 40. They're just outside at the 41st spot. Number 40. The 1989 to 1990 Detroit Pistons. Now, this was the second of back-to-back NBA championships for this Detroit squad. And although they dominated the competition, it was not quite to the extent that they did the year before. With that being said, they did have a 59-23 record, and under the leadership of Chuck Daly, they did sweep the Indiana Pacers in the first round. They gentlemen swept the New York Knicks in the second round, and then they defeated Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and the Chicago Bulls in the Eastern Conference Finals before meeting up with the Portland Trail Blazers and gentlemen sweeping them. So outside of MJ and Pippen, they pretty much cruised throughout the NBA playoffs. On top of that, I am on record saying that this was one of the deepest teams in the history of the league. Obviously, leading the way for them was the two-way player who was just such a great facilitator and a great scorer whenever you needed him to be, and that was Isaiah Thomas. Alongside of him was one of the most underrated two guards in the history of the league and a fantastic two-way player in Joe Dumars. And then they had Dennis Rodman, who was the Defensive Player of the Year despite the fact that he was coming off the bench. Bill Laimbeer, James Edwards, Mark Aguirre, Vinnie Johnson was a great spark plug off the bench, and even John Salley at the age of 25 was a solid contribution at this point as well. And so this team was ridiculously deep. They were kind of getting towards the end of their run as contenders. And they were not really old, but at this point they had had many years of deep playoff runs. And so definitely much better in 1989 than they were in 1990. So you will see that 89 team later on in this video. But as far as the 1990 team, I think the 40th spot is a solid ranking for them. Number 39. the 2014 to 2015 Golden State Warriors. Now, as you guys all know, this was the very beginning of the Golden State Warriors dynasty. Steph Curry still had his baby face. He was still the baby-faced assassin. This team was very strong, though. They had a 67-15 record throughout the regular season, and no series in the NBA playoffs went beyond 6 games. They took out the Memphis Grizzlies in the semifinals in 6, and then they took out LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers in 6 games in those finals. But that was obviously a very shorthanded Cavaliers team, seeing that both Kevin Love and Kyrie Irving were injured on the game's biggest stage. And so LeBron did his best to keep up, but ultimately this Warriors team was too much. Steph Curry was the league MVP, averaging about 24 points per game. Klay Thompson was averaging about 22 points per game. Obviously, Draymond Green was much younger, and Andre Iguodala was impactful for this squad as well. And then so far from the strongest Golden State Warriors team that we've seen. With that being said, they were amazing with their perimeter shooting, with their team chemistry, with their ball movement, and they were still very hungry at this point in their careers. And so for this group, I'll have to give them the 39th spot. Number 38. The 2011 to 2012 Miami Heat. Now, you need to remember that this was a lockout-shortened season, as there was only 66 regular season games played this year. The Miami Heat, they did have a 46-20 record this year, and so from a regular season standpoint, not necessarily the most dominant, but they only went to 7 games in one of their playoff series, which was against the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals, and then in the NBA Finals, they met up with the Oklahoma City Thunder, where they took them out in 5 games. Dwayne Wade was still very, very strong at this point, and this is the point where LeBron really matured as a leader and as a big-time performer in the postseason. Of course, he was the MVP of the league this year, but he was also 4th overall in the Defensive Player of the Year rankings. Chris Bosh was an all-star as well, averaging about 18 points and 8 rebounds, and then Dwayne Wade was putting up about 22, 5, and 5. And so a very strong group. They would get much stronger the year following when they would add Ray Allen to the mix, but there were still some nice rotation pieces to this group as well. And so this Miami Heat Big 3 squad, they'll take the 38th spot. Number 37. Now we're getting to the sum of the best 60 Celtics teams. This is the 1964 to 1965 Boston Celtics. Now, this was an 80-game schedule, and in those 80 games, the Celtics went 62-18. And they did go to 7 games with the Philadelphia 76ers, a very talented 76ers team. But then in the NBA Finals against Jerry West and Elgin Baylor of the Los Angeles Lakers, they took them out in 5 games. I don't know what more needs to be said about this team that you haven't heard before. One thing that I should mention is Bill Russell was the MVP, but 4th in the MVP voting this year was Sam Jones, and he was always kind of the leading scorer for the Celtics throughout his prime, and this was definitely the prime of his career, because Sam at this point, yeah, he's 31 years old, but by the league standards, he was extremely efficient at this point, while scoring about 26 points per game, and then was taking his game up in the NBA playoffs, as he then was averaging 28.6 points per game in the postseason. And so Sam Jones is one guy who never gets enough credit. Tons of depth to this team. And so, yeah, this 65 Celtics team, I don't care what era you're comparing them to, they were a very, very strong group. Number 36, you've got the 1979 to 1980 Los Angeles Lakers. Now, this was a really, really exciting team. Obviously, this is famous for being Magic Johnson's rookie year. During his rookie year, he was still having to compete with Norm Nixon for the floor general responsibilities. With that being said, they did have a 60-22 record throughout the regular season, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was still performing at an MVP level at the age of 32. Kareem actually was the MVP of the league this year, while averaging 25 points per game, 11 rebounds, and 3.5 block shots, which was also leading the league. Magic Johnson was the runner-up for the Rookie of the Year. They also had Jamal Wilkes on this team, a young Michael Cooper, and so a strong group. Not overall as deep and as talented as they would later go on to be in their Showtime days, but between a young Magic Johnson and a still MVP-capable Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, this was still a very stellar group that went on to win the NBA championship over the Philadelphia 76ers in 6 games, and their other 2 playoff series, they only went 5. So they handled the competition pretty easily as well. Number 35, you've got the 2008 to 2009 Los Angeles Lakers. Now, as you guys all know, the prior year, they had been eliminated by the Boston Celtics, so Kobe was on an absolute revenge mission this year, leading his team to a 65-17 regular season record. Now, the one hiccup for this team was in the Western Conference semifinals, where they went 7 games with the Houston Rockets, who were led by Ron Artest. And the thing about that really kind of holds the Lakers back is that wasn't even really a healthy Rockets team. They didn't have Yao Ming, Tracy McGrady, all that. And so this was a Rockets team that was not supposed to take the Lakers to 7 games, but they did anyway. Outside of that, the Lakers beat the Jazz in the first round in 5 games. They defeated the Denver Nuggets, a very talented Nuggets team led by Carmelo Anthony and Chauncey Billups, in the Western Conference Finals in 6 games, and then just absolutely slapped Dwight Howard and the Orlando Magic in 5 games in the NBA Finals. Kobe Bryant, Pau Gasol, Derek Fisher, Lamar Odom coming off the bench as a 6th Man of the Year candidate. Trevor Ariza was absolutely huge for us as he was constantly causing valuable turnovers and getting key steals when it really mattered. And so, yeah, this was a very, very solid team led by a Kobe that was honestly having one of his greatest playoff runs of his career. Truly stellar stuff. And so this Lakers team, they will be finishing in the 35th spot. Number 34, you've got the 2022 to 2023 Denver Nuggets. Now, as you guys all know, the guy who was leading this team was the Joker, Nikola Jokic. And what he had was simply one of the greatest postseason playoff runs that we have ever seen in the history of this league. Over that playoff stretch, he averaged 30 points, 13.5 rebounds, 9.5 assists, and went on to be the Finals MVP. The guy was utterly ridiculous in this postseason. But what a lot of people forget is Jamal Murray was balling his brains out as well, as Murray averaged 26 points per game, 7 and 5 over that playoff stretch. And so their team was just clicking when it mattered the most. Over the course of the postseason, they had 6 different players who were scoring in double digits, which included Aaron Gordon, Caldwell Pope, Porter Jr., and Bruce Brown. And so I think this was overall a great team. Obviously, you had a fantastic leader. Their regular season was kind of tame by their standards. It was only a 53-29 record, but not a single postseason series went beyond 6 games, and 3 out of the 4 postseason matchups were 5 games or less. And so a really dominant playoff run regardless of the regular season. And based on how all their guys were playing when it mattered the most, they certainly deserve a pretty decent ranking on this list. Number 33, the 1972 to 1973 New York Knicks. Now, if you ask me, I think out of all the 70s Knicks teams, this one was the best. Throughout the regular season, they had a 57-25 record. They won their first round matchup against the Baltimore Bullets in 4 games. Then, with a strong Celtics team that would go on to win 2 out of the next 3 championships, they went to 7 games but ultimately beat them. And then in the NBA Finals, they were up against their rivals, the Los Angeles Lakers, who they had met up in the NBA Finals a couple times leading up to that, and they beat them in 5 games. This team, I've already talked about them several times in this 2-part series, and they were stupid talented, ridiculously stacked. Dave DeBusschere, as I said, he was the 1970s version of Dennis Rodman. Bill Bradley was an all-star this year and was huge for them. Willis Reed, although was late in his career, was still having an impact. And Walt Frazier, he was solid as he always is, finished 7th overall in the MVP standings this year. And Jerry Lucas had an impact as well. And so, very, very talented New York Knicks team. I mean, technically you can make an argument that this is the greatest Knicks team in the history of their franchise. I definitely think there's a strong argument for that. So on the all-time list, they'll have to settle for 33rd though. Number 32, you've got the 2015 to 2016 Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, when you're talking about strength of competition and who they had to defeat, you could certainly make the argument that this team should be much higher. But they had a 57-25 record throughout the regular season. Then in the NBA playoffs, they did sweep the Detroit Pistons. They did sweep the Atlanta Hawks in the semifinals. and then they defeated the Toronto Raptors in 6 games in the Eastern Conference Finals. And so at the time, the Eastern Conference was still considered weak, so they pretty much cruised to the NBA Finals. But then, as major underdogs, they were up against the 73-9 Golden State Warriors in the NBA Finals. And instead of laying over after they fell behind 3-1 in the series, LeBron James and Kyrie Irving absolutely locked in and made the comeback to ultimately win the series. It wasn't just them though. Kevin Love was obviously a good third option, and then Tristan Thompson was a 6th Man of the Year candidate, and so they had some solid pieces as well. But again, they defeated the greatest regular season team of all time, and based on the fact that they had LeBron James playing his mind out and Kyrie Irving hitting clutch shots and pouring in all the stats he did, you got to rate this team pretty decently. So they'll have to settle for this 32nd spot on this list. Number 31, the 2006 to 2007 San Antonio Spurs. And so another one of the Spurs teams that were considered, quote, boring during this era, but man, were they talented and man, were they well coached with Greg Popovich. They had a 58-24 record throughout the regular season. Only one playoff series won as many as 6 games, which was against the 7-second offense Phoenix Suns. But outside of that, they defeated the Denver Nuggets in the first round in 5 games. In the Western Conference Finals, they took out the Jazz in 5 games. And then they swept a young LeBron James-led Cleveland Cavaliers team in the NBA Finals. Defensively, this team was just so solid and so sound, as they not only had Tim Duncan, who finished 3rd overall in the Defensive Player of the Year rankings, but they also had Bruce Bowen on the perimeter, who finished 2nd overall in the Defensive Player of the Year rankings. Manu Ginobili was the 2nd in the 6th Man of the Year award, and then Tony Parker was an All-Star that year and even got some MVP consideration. And so ultimately, this was a very, very strong San Antonio group. You could even make the argument that they'd be ranked much higher, but I promise you, this will not be the last time that you see the Tim Duncan-led San Antonio Spurs on this list. Now we're down to the final 30, and starting off the final 30 is the 1983 to 1984 Boston Celtics. And I think a lot of people would argue that this team should be ranked even higher. They did dominate the regular season with a 62-20 record. They did go on to win the NBA championship, where they defeated the Los Angeles Lakers, who were led by Magic Johnson, in a 7-game series. With that being said, that was not the only team that took them to 7 in the NBA playoffs. They also went to 7 with the 5th-seeded New York Knicks in the 2nd round, who were led by Bernard King. And that was a team they were highly favored to defeat, and ultimately it was a nail-biter going all the way to 7 games. And so that definitely holds them back from being much higher on this list. But this Celtics team was, of course, very, very stacked. They were great offensively. They were great defensively. Obviously, they had Larry Bird leading the way, who was the MVP of the league that season and who was 2nd team all defense. Dennis Johnson finished 3rd overall in the Defensive Player of the Year rankings, and Robert Parrish was an all-star, averaging about 19 points per game, and Kevin McHale was not in the starting lineup yet, but he did finish as the 6th Man of the Year winner. Cedric Cornbread Maxwell and Danny Ainge were contributors, as they always were at this time. And so yeah, this Celtics team, very, very solid, ultimately did go on to win the championship, but not before they were tested a couple times first. Number 29, we've got the 1981 to 1982 Los Angeles Lakers. This Lakers team made it through the Western Conference with a 57-25 record, but they did, for the most part, cruise throughout the NBA playoffs as they swept the Phoenix Suns in the semifinals, they swept the San Antonio Spurs in the Western Conference Finals, and then they defeated the Philadelphia 76ers in 6 games. You guys all know about the guys on the roster. Magic Johnson was an MVP candidate this year. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was obviously the big man down low, and Michael Cooper was 1st team all defense. But they also had Jamal Wilkes, Norm Nixon, Mitch Kupchak, and Kurt Rambis all making contributions. And so a very good Lakers team, but there's definitely better Showtime Lakers teams that will make it as we go further on the list. Number 28. the 2024 to 2025 Oklahoma City Thunder. Now, when this team was in the middle of their dominant run last year, we were talking a lot about them being among the greatest teams of all time. For one, their defense was incredibly stifling, as they were absolutely smothering guys on the perimeter, and we all famously remember how they did an excellent job of containing Nikola Jokic. They also dominated the regular season with a 68-14 record, and the only thing that holds this team back is that they did go to 2 Game 7s in the NBA playoffs, one being with Jokic and the Denver Nuggets in the semifinals, and then in the NBA Finals where they defeated the Indiana Pacers. And again, if Tyrese Halliburton doesn't tear his Achilles, who knows what happens in those NBA Finals? Maybe they don't even end up being NBA champions. But this Thunder team did ultimately get it done. Of course, they had tons of depth. They had SGA, who was the MVP of the league that year, averaging 33 points per game while doing it extremely efficiently. Jalen Williams was averaging about 22 a game. Then they had defensive dogs like Alex Caruso and Lou Dort. And of course, you can't forget Chet Holmgren down low doing his thing. And so a very, very strong team, and I think with this team's youth, they're probably going to only get better as the years go on. But as far as where they're ranked, considering how they handled things in the postseason, I think they'll just have to settle for the 28th spot on this list. Number 27, the 1960 to 1961 Boston Celtics. Now, this Celtics team was obviously led by Bill Russell, winning yet another championship with him leading the way. As always, tons of depth to this group, a 57-22 record throughout the regular season, and both NBA playoff matchups against the Syracuse Nationals and against the St. Louis Hawks. They beat them each in a 5-game series, gentlemen sweeping both of them. Bill Russell was the MVP of the league, averaging 17 points and 24 rebounds, but finishing 6th in the MVP voting was Bob Cousy, who averaged 18 points and 8 assists, and finishing 7th in the MVP voting was Tommy Heinsohn, who averaged 21 points and 10 rebounds. So that's crazy. Just on this roster alone, they had 3 guys who finished in the top 7 spots of the MVP voting. Then you add Sam Jones to the mix. Then you add Frank Ramsey and Bill Sharman to that group as well. And so this was obviously a ridiculously stacked team, and a team that was certainly worthy of being in the 27th spot on this list. Number 26, the 1992 to 1993 Chicago Bulls. Now, some of you might hear this and hear Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Horace Grant. This Bulls team is going to be ranked only 26th. Yes, but you have to remember where they were at this time. In 1993, this team was dealing with a lot of drama. It also wasn't their most dominant and convincing regular season, as they finished that season with a 57-25 record. You also have to remember there was the whole gambling scandal going on with Michael Jordan, and overall the team just seemed pretty tired. They had a tough Eastern Conference Finals, but they did ultimately take out the New York Knicks in 6 games. And in the NBA Finals against the Phoenix Suns, yes, they did defeat them in 6 games, but it took an all-time great series for Michael Jordan, where he averaged 41 points, 8 and 6 in order to cap that off. And so, of course, we're down to the final 26. And so this is still one of the greatest teams in the history of the league. But again, I do think this was a very tired Chicago Bulls team that did have a lot of distractions at the end of their title run. It was not as quite dominating all year long as they had been in 1992 and in 1991. And so for that reason, that will have to be the lowest ranked of the first 3-peat Bulls teams. Number 25 is the 1998 to 1999 San Antonio Spurs. Now you got to remember, this was a lockout-shortened season that was only 50 games long, where the NBA season itself started on February 1st. And so it was a ridiculous sequence where they had to play a bazillion games in a very little amount of time. And so was really a weird season, and when they got to the NBA Finals, they were going up against the 8th-seeded New York Knicks from the Eastern Conference. Although they dominated the postseason, they defeated the Minnesota Timberwolves in the first round, 3-1. They took out the Los Angeles Lakers with Shaq and Kobe in a sweep. Then they took out a talented Portland Trailblazers team. That was a sweep in the Western Conference Finals. And so they did cruise throughout the NBA playoffs. Tim Duncan was just getting his career started, but it was obviously a force at that point. And David Robinson was still a Defensive Player of the Year candidate as well. Then they had guys like Sean Elliott, Mario Elie, Avery Johnson, and Steve Kerr. So overall, a very talented team. But given the fact that it was kind of a wild and hard to predict season that had a lot of different variables and was not what you're traditionally accustomed to from a scheduling standpoint, I do think that has to hold them back just a little bit. Number 24, we've got the 2017 to 2018 Golden State Warriors. Now, as far as the teams that won the championship, or the two teams that won the championship, this is the worst of the two for the Kevin Durant-led Golden State Warriors. Obviously, they were still really dominant, though. They had a 58-24 regular season record. They took out a strong San Antonio Spurs team in just 5 games in the first round. Then in the second round, they took out the New Orleans Pelicans in 5. They did go to 7 games with James Harden and Chris Paul of the Houston Rockets, but even there is a little bit of a what if, because Chris Paul did have an injury and ended up missing Game 7, and so who knows, that might have made a big difference. But then they swept LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers in 4 games in the NBA Finals. KD, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Steph Curry, you have their death lineup, and Andre Iguodala making it into the starting rotation at times. Overall, not as deep as, say, their 2016 team from top to bottom. But, you know, when you've got 4 Hall of Famers in your starting lineup, you're going to be doing pretty well. And so one of the greatest teams of all time, but not quite top 20, if you ask me. Number 23, this might be a surprise to some people, but I've got the 2019 to 2020 Los Angeles Lakers. Now, this Lakers team were clicking together and gelling very well together. LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Alex Caruso was big for this team defensively, Kyle Kuzma, Caldwell Pope, Danny Green, who obviously was struggling in the playoffs, but ultimately they had plenty to get it done. Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee were really doing a good job of holding down the center position. Even JaVale McGee was low-key in the Defensive Player of the Year conversation in the first third of the season. And so this team was strong, but I think one of the most forgotten and underrated aspects of this group is that heading into the fourth quarter, if they had a lead, it was basically over, because they were 57-0 when leading at the end of 3 quarters over the course of the entirety of this season. And so not only was it a strong team with LeBron and AD leading the way, but they were also just closers, man. You couldn't let these guys have a lead heading into the fourth quarter. And such a well-rounded group with great centerpieces, great playmakers, great post players, great defensive dogs. And ultimately, it's why they were able to dominate their way through both, not just the NBA regular season, but through the postseason as well. Obviously, you have the bubble playoffs, and so that's going to hold them back. You didn't have home court advantage get to play out. There's not all those different variables that you're used to having in the postseason. But still, if you look at it from how they dominated the regular season, and then they won at 5 in the first round, 1 at 5 in the second round, 5 in the third round, and then 4-2 in the NBA Finals against the Miami Heat, you still got to give them their respect. Number 22, we've got the 2010 to 2011 Dallas Mavericks. Now, some people would argue that this was the first true three-point shooting team, or even just jump shooting team, to win the NBA championship, and they were quite the surprise. They had a 57-25 record throughout the regular season, but remember, heading into these NBA playoffs, the Mavericks had kind of been seen as fool's gold, because for the longest time, the Mavericks were just winning 50 to 60 regular season games year after year, but couldn't get it done in the postseason. Then that's when they went on their historic run with Dirk Nowitzki leading the way. First, they took out a good Portland Trailblazers team in 6 games in the first round. Then they swept the defending champion Los Angeles Lakers, who were trying to three-peat. So they knocked out Kobe Bryant and Pau Gasol in the semifinals. Then in the Western Conference Finals, they were up against a young and upcoming Oklahoma City Thunder team with Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Russell Westbrook, and they took them out in 5. And then in the NBA Finals, up against the Miami Heat with LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh, after falling behind in the series, they come back and they defeat them to win the NBA championship. So yes, Dirk Nowitzki was the lone superstar on this team, but you would be incorrect if you were to act like this wasn't a deep team, because Tyson Chandler was third in the Defensive Player of the Year voting that year. Jason Kidd was still a good floor general for this team at times. Jason Terry was the Sixth Man of the Year, was second in the Sixth Man of the Year voting, and obviously was huge in the NBA Finals. Sean Marion was a solid defensive player and was a good role player as well. And so overall, a lot of solid depth to this team, and there's a reason why they were able to beat the defending champion Lakers and obviously the Miami Heat, who would go on to win the next following 2 championships. Number 21, I've got the 2001 to 2002 Los Angeles Lakers. Now, this Lakers team is very, very strong. I actually had someone in the comments make a really interesting point recently where they said, if you're going to rank the 2002 Kings the best non-championship team because they should have won the championship, well, then naturally, shouldn't that make the 2002 Lakers the worst team to win the championship? And, that's a good point. I could have done it that way, but I'm not. Ultimately, this team was still very, very talented, and so I am ranking them high. So at number 21, again, the 2002 Lakers, you have Shaq dominating the NBA Finals against the New Jersey Nets, but Kobe Bryant was arguably the MVP of this team as they were making their way through the Western Conference playoffs. And so both of their superstars were going off, doing their thing. It wasn't the most dominant regular season for them. And then in the NBA playoffs, they were tested, of course, against the Sacramento Kings that did go to 7 games and ultimately in overtime in that 7th game. But ultimately, the Lakers were able to pull it out. Maybe they got a little bit of help from the referees, so I'll leave that up to you guys to debate. But yeah, they'll have to settle for the 21st spot on this list. Now we're getting to the point of the video where people start getting in their feelings and calling me names. And so at number 20, we got the 1980 to 1981 Boston Celtics. Now this team obviously was led by a very young Larry Bird, who took them to a 62-20 record throughout the regular season. Now they did go to 7 games with Dr. J and the Philadelphia 76ers in the Eastern Conference Finals, but they did beat them there. And then they went on to the NBA Finals, where they took out Moses Malone and the Houston Rockets in 6 games. Now, this Celtics team was very different than the Celtics team you would go on to see in the mid to late 1980s. But with that being said, still a very deep team. Larry Bird finished second overall in the MVP voting that year, as he averaged about 21 points, 11 rebounds, 5.5 assists, and 2 steals. Nate Tiny Archibald is a guy who usually doesn't get enough credit for the impact he made for this team, as he was averaging about 14 points per game and 8 assists, and he actually finished 9th overall in the MVP rankings this year. And another MVP finalist, finishing 7th, was Robert Parrish, who was an all-star, averaging 19 points per game and 9.5 rebounds. Kevin McHale was only in his rookie year, and coming off the bench, he was chipping in about 9 points and 5 rebounds. And Cedric Maxwell, Cornbread, as they called him, he eventually went on to be the Finals MVP. He was their starting small forward as Larry Bird started his career at the power forward position. So overall, a very strong and solid team. Great in the regular season, great in the postseason. They didn't have the most dominant postseason run, which is why they aren't higher than 20th. But based on their talent, based on Bird being, even at his young age, still basically peak Bird, you got to have them at least pretty high on this list, which is why they're number 20 for me. Number 19, we've got another Boston Celtics team, but this one much more recently. It's the 2023 to 2024 Boston Celtics. Now, this team was obviously led by their star tandem of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, who was the Finals MVP that year. But there was a lot more than that. Drew Holiday was their point guard, who was basically their defensive stopper on the perimeter. He finished on the second all-defense team this year. Also finishing on the second all-defense team was Derek White, who was one of the best shot-blocking 2 guards in the history of the league. Kristaps Porzingis, when he was healthy, was also extremely effective for this team. And so overall, a very, very good Celtics team. They went 64-18 throughout the regular season, and then they absolutely cruised through the NBA playoffs as they beat the Miami Heat Heat in the first round in 5 games, the Cleveland Cavaliers in the second in 5 games. They swept the Indiana Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals, and then comfortably handled Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, and the Dallas Mavericks in 5 games on the game's biggest stage. And so, yeah, you could argue that they could even be higher on this list, but again, now we're looking at the best of the very best. So for me, they're going to have to settle for the 19th spot. Number 18. Some people think this is the greatest Lakers team from this decade. Technically, it's second for me. We're looking at the 1984 to 1985 Los Angeles Lakers. So now we're completely in the Showtime era. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is getting a little bit up there in age, but he's still very, very effective for this team. He went on to be a huge player in the NBA Finals for this group. Magic Johnson was the runner-up for the MVP award this year. Michael Cooper finished 4th in the Defensive Player of the Year rankings. Then Byron Scott and James Worthy doing what they usually do for Magic in the fast break, being reliable scorers. This Lakers team had a 62-20 record throughout the regular season, and then they handled their business in the playoffs. They ultimately won the NBA Finals against the Celtics in 6 games, and every series prior to that took 5 games or less. And so, yeah, very, very strong Lakers team. It's a good conversation on whether or not you'd go with the 1985 Lakers or the 1987 Lakers, who I will be talking about very shortly here. But yeah, for me, this team will have to settle for the 18th spot. Number 17, we've got the 1991 to 1992 Chicago Bulls. So this was the second championship in their first three-peat. And this Bulls team went 67-15 throughout the regular season. Obviously, they were led by Phil Jackson, but they also had Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and Horace Grant. In the first round, they swept the Miami Heat 3-0. They did go to 7 games with the New York Knicks, an extremely physical series that the Knicks thought they could win, but ultimately the Bulls took it home. Then they went 6 against the Cleveland Cavaliers, and then they went 6 against the Portland Trail Blazers, where Michael Jordan famously broke records, like the records for most points in a single half, and for 3-pointers made in a half and in a finals game. And so this team was solid. Michael Jordan led the league in scoring while also being the MVP and also being first team all defense. Scottie Pippen is now at a point in his career where he's a regular all-star candidate. Horace Grant, a good third option. Then, of course, they've got great shooters in this group as well between John Paxson and BJ Armstrong. And so again, this is one of the all-time great Bulls teams. You could make an argument that they're better than the 91 Bulls. Personally, I do prefer the 91 Bulls just by a little bit. But yeah, with Michael Jordan leading the way, this is easily one of the greatest teams in the history of the league. Number 16, maybe a team I have ranked much higher than most people do, but I definitely think they deserve their respect. And I'm talking about the 2003 to 2004 Detroit Pistons. You can make an argument that this was the greatest defensive team in the history of the league. They were led by the all-time great head coach, Larry Brown. They played a very unselfish style of basketball. Sure, they didn't have a clear-cut leading scorer type superstar on their team, but they dominated by committee. Ben Wallace at the center position was always a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. Then they had Richard Hamilton coming off of screens and always moving without the basketball. Chauncey Billups, who could spread the floor and was also known as Mr. Big Shot, so he was very reliable. Tayshaun Prince was an extremely lengthy small forward who was one of the best perimeter defensive players in the entire league and deserves a ton of credit for Kobe Bryant being shut down in the 2004 NBA Finals. Then you also had Rasheed Wallace on the team. Overall, it was a very, very deep squad, very talented from top to bottom. They did go to 7 games in the semifinals with the New Jersey Nets, but again, that was a very talented Nets team. But then in the NBA Finals against the super team Lakers, who had Shaq, Kobe, Karl Malone was injured for some of that series, but they also had Gary Payton. They ultimately just shut them down, completely shut them down, defeating them 4-1. And everybody likes to act like that Lakers team was this big failed super team, when in reality, they made it to the NBA Finals. They defeated the Spurs. They defeated a lot of good teams to get to that stage. It's really just because the Pistons utterly dominated them that suddenly they look like this failed super team. And so for me, this team definitely deserves a lot of respect. I think when I was reacting to like Bleacher Report's 100 greatest teams or maybe 50 greatest teams, this team was ranked number 40, which is just crazy to me. I've got them at number 16. Number 15. I've got the 2012 to 2013 Miami Heat. Now, this was the big three Miami Heat at their absolute peak. They went 66-16 throughout the regular season, and you guys will remember, they also had a 27-game winning streak during the regular season, which is the second longest in NBA history, only trailing the 1972 Lakers, who won 33 straight games. LeBron James, I think this was the absolute peak of his career. Some people might argue 2018 LeBron James with the Cavs, but for me, this was it. Because LeBron was second into the Defensive Player of the Year voting, he was also the MVP of the league while averaging 27, 8, and 7, and while being stupid efficient. He shot 56.5% from the field, 40.6% from three-point range, and then, 75.3% from the free throw line. But from the field and from three-point range, LeBron was nuts. Then you had Wade still performing at a high level. Bosh was still doing his thing. But this was also the first year that they had Ray Allen, who was absolutely spreading the floor, hitting big shots for them, and who averaged 11 points per game over that series. And obviously, they don't win the championship this year without Ray Allen, who was hit possibly the most clutch and needed shot in the history of the league. They swept the Milwaukee Bucks in the first round. They took out the Chicago Bulls in the second round in 5 games. Then they went to 7 with the Pacers, and then they went to 7 with the Spurs. So back-to-back 7-game series, and for that reason, you might keep them a little bit lower. Some people might argue that this is a top 10 greatest team of all time, but for me, they have to settle for the 15th spot because things were still very, very competitive. And yes, that Indiana Pacers team was great with Paul George and Roy Hibbert and Lance Stevenson and all those different guys. But if you're talking about the greatest of the great, you probably need to handle them a little bit more comfortably if you want to crack the top 10. Number 14, we've got the 96-97 Chicago Bulls. Now, everybody talks about the 95-96 Bulls that went 72-10 throughout the regular season. But what everybody forgets, and what basically no one ever talks about, is they nearly won 70 games in back-to-back seasons, as this Bulls team finished with a 69-13 record. And the only reason they didn't win 70 games is because Scottie Pippen missed a wide-open shot that would have been the 70th win against the New York Knicks. With that being said, they got it done when it really mattered, as they went on to win the NBA championship, and not a single playoff series went beyond 6 games. They handled the Utah Jazz in 6 in the NBA Finals, and every series prior to that took at most 5 games to get it done. Michael Jordan was still performing at a high level. He finished as the runner-up for the MVP this year, but many people think he should have won the MVP over Karl Malone. He was also top 5 in the Defensive Player of the Year voting, and as usual, led the NBA in scoring. Scottie Pippen averaged about 20 points per game and was still very effective on both ends of the court. Tony Kukoc was a 6th Man of the Year candidate, finishing second for that spot, and Dennis Rodman led the NBA in rebounding, averaging 16 per game. I could go on because you also have Steve Kerr, Luke Longley, Ron Harper. You could talk about this team to no end, basically. But for me, the 96-97 Bulls are good enough for the 14th spot on this list. Number 13, and a team that you could certainly argue should be much higher, is the 1966-1967 Philadelphia 76ers. Now, this team finished the regular season with a 68-13 record. They were led by Wilt Chamberlain, who had one of the most goofy MVP campaigns in the history of the league, as he averaged 24 points, 24 rebounds, 8 assists, while hitting an insane 68.3% of his shots. He also shot 44% from the free throw line, so hack a Wilt was definitely a strategy at that time. But they had a lot more than that as well. They had 2 other All-Stars, in fact. They had Hal Greer, who was averaging about 22 points per game, and Chet Walker, who was averaging 19 points per game. You also have to mention Billy Cunningham at the small forward position, who is an NBA Hall of Famer. And so, yeah, this team was incredibly deep. The ball movement was absolutely beautiful, and this was without a doubt their year as they cruised through the NBA playoffs. They defeated the Cincinnati Royals 3-1. Then in the division finals against the Boston Celtics, who usually had their number, they destroyed them 4-1. And then in the NBA finals, they defeated the San Francisco Warriors 4-2. And so, yeah, one of the greatest teams of all time. And at least in a certain frame of mind, you could argue that this was the best Wilt Chamberlain that we've ever seen when it comes to all-around stats and basically as being a team leader. Number 12, the 1963-64 Boston Celtics. So for me, when you're looking at that 60s Celtics dynasty, this was their absolute peak. They had a 59 and 21 record throughout the regular season, and in the NBA playoffs, it was smooth sailing. They took out the Cincinnati Royals in the division finals 4-1, and then they defeated the San Francisco Warriors in the NBA finals 4-1. And you guys at this point have heard about these guys over and over again. But leading the team in scoring was John Havlicek, who was just 23 years old at this point, but was still a walking bucket. Bill Russell led the NBA in rebounding, which usually was an honor reserved for Wilt Chamberlain, but this was Bill Russell's year, as he averaged 15 points and 24.7 rebounds a game, while also getting about 5 assists a game. Sam Jones was close to being the team's leading scorer, averaging 19.4 per game, and Tommy Heinsohn was an all-star this year as well, averaging about 16.5 points. And so a very, very deep team. They dominated the year from beginning to end, whether it was regular season, postseason, and basically the perfect blend of the early 60s and late 50s Celtics and the late 60s Celtics. When you look at who they had on the roster from top to bottom, this is the best overlap that you ever got from this group. And so for me, they are number 12 among the greatest teams of all time. Number 11, the 2013 to 2014 San Antonio Spurs. And although they're number 11, so just barely outside of the top 10, a lot of people make the argument that this was the greatest passing team in the history of the league. Their ball movement gets praised to no end as they went 62-20 throughout the regular season. In the NBA playoffs, they did eventually go on to easily handle the Big Three Miami Heat as they beat them 4-1 on the biggest stage. Although they did go to 7 games with the Dallas Mavericks, who did have an older Dirk Nowitzki at that point, and that was in the first round. And so they were very close to being eliminated as a first round team. And if that was the case, they would be nowhere near the top 10 on this list. And so for me, that does hold them back a little bit. But with that being said, you had Kawhi Leonard, who is obviously, always a Defensive Player of the Year candidate at this point of his career. Tony Parker's still doing his thing. Tim Duncan, although he's getting up there in age, is still very effective. Manu Ginobili is a 6th Man of the Year candidate, and even Patty Mills was a 6th Man of the Year candidate as well. Danny Green was an elite 3-point shooter. Boris Diaw was a great passer and a guy who did a little things for this team. And so amazing group, incredibly unselfish group, and I think there's going to be a lot of people who are frustrated that I didn't put them in the top 10, but let's be honest, this group starts becoming very, very competitive once you start getting to the top of the list. Now we're down to the best of the very best, the top 10, and this is where it gets extremely difficult to rank, but I did the best I could, and who knows, maybe even next week I'd change my mind on some of these, but these are my honest thoughts, and let me know what you guys think about these rankings in the comment section below. Honestly, all of these teams in the top 10 have an argument for number 1 if you wanted to make it, but I have my reasons for it, and I'll do my best to explain those. So, starting out at number 10, is the 1970 to 1971 Milwaukee Bucks. Now this team had a 66-16 record, and these Bucks teams, they're one of the greatest teams of all time. They were number 1 in offensive rating this year and number 1 in defensive rating as well. For some reason, this team doesn't get the love and credit that they usually deserve on these type of lists, but not only did they dominate the regular season on both ends of the court, but they also dominated the NBA playoffs as they beat the San Francisco Warriors in 5 games, then the Los Angeles Lakers they took out in 5 games, a very talented Lakers team I should add, and then in the NBA Finals against the Baltimore Bullets, they just outright swept them. You had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was arguably never better than he was at this point in his career. In this MVP season, he led the league in scoring while averaging about 32 points per game and 16 rebounds a game while hitting 58% of his shots. But it wasn't just him, though. Another top 5 player in the MVP rankings was his teammate, Oscar Robertson, who's quite simply one of the greatest point guards in the history of the league. This year, he was averaging about 19.5 points and 8 assists and 6 rebounds. They also had Bobby Dandridge, who was a solid third option, averaging 18 a game. John McLaughlin was another solid weapon, and even Greg Smith was in double digits as well. And so one of the greatest teams ever. There's basically no aspect that they didn't dominate. And so the only thing that maybe they didn't have compared to a lot of these teams is 3 legitimate superstars. But as far as like how they handled the competition, whether it be the regular season or the postseason, they're among the best of the very best. Number 9, the 1988 to 1989 Detroit Pistons. And again, I am on record saying that this team might be the deepest team in the history of the league, so we're going to talk about a lot of their players. The 89 Pistons had a 63-19 record. They were led by Isaiah Thomas. Again, talked about this earlier, but just an amazing dual threat. If you needed 40 points from him, he could give you that. And then the next game, he could give you 20 assists. The guy was insane. Incredible ball handler, incredible player in the clutch. Alongside of him, leading the team was also Joe Dumars, averaging 17 points per game. He was one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. You had Mark Aguirre, who was acquired in a trade with Adrian Dantley, so mid-season they bring in Aguirre. Dennis Rodman, Defensive Player of the Year candidate. Vinny the Microwave Johnson coming off the bench being a spark plug for this team. Then down low, you got Bill Laimbeer and Rick Mahorn, obviously being strong enforcers for this team as they are fully in their bad boy Pistons phase. And then this team just dominated the NBA playoffs. They swept the Boston Celtics, who, albeit, did have an injured Larry Bird at that point. But then in the semifinals, they swept a very talented Milwaukee Bucks team. Then they took out Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and the Chicago Bulls in the Eastern Conference Finals in 6 games. And then in the NBA Finals, going up against an undefeated Lakers team throughout the Western Conference playoffs, they sweep this Lakers team 4-0. Now, Magic Johnson did have some issues with his hamstring, but they still won the first game and they looked like they were in a good position to win the second game as well before Magic Johnson got injured. And so yes, this Pistons team was utterly incredible. And when you look at the strength of their competition, yeah, they're certainly in the argument for the top 10 greatest teams of all time. Number 8. You've got the beginning of one of the most iconic dynasties in NBA history, arguably the most iconic dynasty in NBA history, or maybe even sports history. This is the 1991 Chicago Bulls. This team had a 61-21 record, and they were extremely hungry. After being eliminated for 3 straight seasons at the hands of the Detroit Pistons, they were just chomping at the bit to get back to the playoffs and get one more shot at Detroit. And after having a fantastic regular season, they would get their chance. They swept the New York Knicks in the first round 3-0. Then in the semifinals against the Philadelphia 76ers, they gentlemen swept them. Then in the Eastern Conference Finals, they would face the Detroit Pistons, and a lot of the time the narrative is that Pistons team was old. You could argue that they had been through a lot of wear and tear through, constant deep postseason runs, but they certainly weren't old. Most of their players were still in their late 20s, but the Bulls made them look old by sweeping them out of the Eastern Conference playoffs. Then against Magic Johnson and the Los Angeles Lakers in the NBA Finals, they gentlemen swept them 4-1. Jordan was obviously, incredible, and according to Michael himself, this was the very peak of his game as he led the NBA in scoring, was a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, and was the MVP of the league. Scottie Pippen was second team all defense, and Horace Grant was a fantastic third option. And so, yes, maybe the second greatest Bulls team that we've ever seen, but for me personally, they're still a top 10 team, that's for sure. Number 7. The 1971 to 1972 Los Angeles Lakers. This Lakers team was incredible. They absolutely loved transition, and one of the things that made them so special was the fact that Wilt Chamberlain absolutely owned his role as 2 things. 1, a rim protector and a rebounder, and maybe even a third thing, an outlet passer as well. Thanks to Bill Sharman being their new head coach, he came in and brought in the mindset of team play and transition basketball, and Jerry West and Gail Goodrich took full advantage as this team utterly dominated the regular season. Not only did they win 69 games in the regular season, which at the time was an NBA record, but they also still hold the NBA record to this very day for the most consecutive victories throughout a regular season, as they won a total of 33 straight. And so this team did have Elgin Baylor throughout the first few games of the regular season, but he got hurt, and then somehow the team even got better. It was a lot more about the fact that Baylor, was a 37-year-old player who wasn't ready for that transition style of basketball. So it was kind of like an addition by subtraction in a way. But Jim McMillan was a great player for them as well, averaging about 19 points per game, and Happy Hairston was averaging 13 a game as well. And so, this team was utterly dominant. Even in the postseason, they handled their business as they swept the Chicago Bulls in the semifinals, and then against Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and the Milwaukee Bucks, and of course Oscar Robertson was on that team as well, they beat them in 6 games. Then, in the NBA Finals against the rivaled New York Knicks, they took them out in 5 games. Some people will make the argument that this is the greatest Lakers team in the history of the franchise, and I would certainly hear that out and respect that argument. But for me, when you're looking at all teams of NBA history, they'll have to settle for the 7th spot overall. Number 6, and it was really, really hard for me to leave this group out of my top 5, but number 6 is the 1982 to 1983 Philadelphia 76ers. And I don't know, I might end up changing my mind on this one. This right here just shows how difficult it is to rank this list, because I would listen to anybody who makes an argument for the 83 76ers to be the greatest team of all time. There's an argument for them. First off, in the regular season, they had a 65-17 record. Now, what you need to know about this team is they were kind of like the 2017 Warriors before the 2017 Warriors, in the sense that they just went to the NBA Finals the year prior with Julius Erving as their superstar, as their leading superstar. But then, in the offseason, they acquire Moses Malone, who was the MVP of the league, and now he's teaming up with Julius Erving. And so it was kind of like that joining of forces with Steph Curry and Kevin Durant to just utterly dominate the NBA. That's what the 76ers were doing in 1983. And so not only did they dominate the regular season, but they also dominated the NBA playoffs, which Moses Malone predicted when he said foe, meaning each series would be over in 4 games. Well, he was 1 game off, because they swept the New York Knicks in 4 games in the semifinals. Then in the conference finals, it took 5 games to beat the Milwaukee Bucks. And then in the NBA Finals against the Showtime Lakers with Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, they swept them as well. This team was also stupid deep. Again, you had Julius Erving, who was 5th overall in the MVP rankings. You had Moses Malone, who won the MVP, who was the only player in NBA history to win back-to-back MVP awards while playing on 2 separate teams. Then you had Maurice Cheeks, who finished 3rd this year in the Defensive Player of the Year rankings. He was a solid floor general, a solid facilitator, and one of the greatest pickpockets that this game has ever seen. Andrew Toney was a walking bucket at the shooting guard spot. He was an all-star this year, averaging about 20 points per game. And then, who also tied with Maurice Cheeks at 3rd overall for the Defensive Player of the Year ranking, and who was the 6th Man of the Year this year, was Bobby Jones. This guy was known as the Secretary of Defense. Before LeBron James made the chase down blocks popular, Bobby Jones was doing that all the time as he ran up and down the court like a gazelle, and this power forward was simply one of the greatest defenders of all time. And again, he was just like a 5th or 6th option for this team. And so the 83 76ers are just utterly goofy. You can make an argument for them to be the best of the best. For me, on this extremely, extremely stacked list, they're going to have to settle for the 6th spot. Number 5, we've got the 1986 to 1987 Los Angeles Lakers. For me, the Showtime Lakers were never better than they were at this point. They absolutely dominated the regular season with a 65-17 record. And one of the reasons why I think this team was better than ever is because I think this was the point where Magic Johnson had absolutely reached the peak of his career. For one reason, they had lost in the NBA playoffs the year prior when the Houston Rockets had eliminated them. And as a way to look to get better, Magic Johnson had a private meeting with his head coach, Pat Riley. And that's where Pat Riley told Magic that he needed to be more aggressive offensively. He needed to look to score. So Magic then met privately with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and he learned more about the hook shot. And now suddenly Magic's better than ever as a dual threat. He averaged 24 points per game and 12.2 assists per game while getting 6 rebounds a game. And so he was one of the leaders, one of the top 10 leaders in scoring. He was the league leader in assists. And for guards, he was among the leaders in rebounding. He was the MVP of the league this year, and his numbers got even better in the NBA Finals against the Boston Celtics. James Worthy, big game James, one of the quickest first steps in the history of the league, one of the most efficient small forwards that we've ever seen. He was doing his thing. Byron Scott was averaging about 17 points per game. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, albeit he is older, he was still an all-star this year as well. And Michael Cooper was the Defensive Player of the Year this year while coming off the bench. He was also one of the ultimate 3-and-D players, of his era. Michael Thompson, Klay Thompson's dad, was also very effective for this team as a bench player as well. And so the Showtime Lakers were never better than they were at this point. In the NBA playoffs, they cruised all the way to the NBA Finals, only losing 1 game throughout the West. And then in the Finals, they went to 6 with the Celtics before Magic and Kareem ultimately wrapped things up. And so you could argue that this is the greatest Lakers team in the history of the league. We'll see how I feel about that. But for me, when you're looking at the entire league as a whole, they'll take home the 5th spot. Number 4, the 2016 to 2017 Golden State Warriors. Now, some people are going to hear this and think it's ridiculous that they're anywhere outside of the top 2, and I have my reasons for that, and I'll get into it. But one thing we cannot question about this group is that they were ridiculously stacked and basically felt unfair. You had Kevin Durant, an MVP candidate who was at the prime age of his career, who was simply added to the 73-9 Golden State Warriors at the exact spot where they were weak. If you remember, in the 2016 NBA playoffs, Harrison Barnes was having a brick fest as he, was struggling and he couldn't find the bottom of the net. Now they replaced that with Kevin Durant, and they went to a 7-game NBA Finals series where they lost by 4 points in the 7th game, again, without KD. And so what happens? Exactly what you'd expect. Durant joins, they go 67-15, and then they dominate the NBA playoffs with one of the most utterly unfair playoff runs that we've ever seen in the history of the league. They sweep the Portland Trailblazers in the first round, they sweep the Utah Jazz, and they sweep the San Antonio Spurs in 4 games in the Western Conference Finals. Then, after going up 3-0, looking like they're going to be the first postseason team to be undefeated in NBA history, they do lose a game to the Cavaliers before gentlemen sweeping them in the 5th game. And so, yes, this team just felt broken, busted, not fair. The only arguments and the only real juicy details about this season at this point was it really Steph Curry's team? Was it Kevin Durant's team? Who's the best player on the team? Now, here's the thing. Here's why they're not top 3. They're just outside of the top 3 for me. As far as the strength of competition, this wasn't the strongest point for the Western Conference, that's for sure. On top of that, they were getting absolutely blown out in Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals before Zaza Pachulia stuck his foot under Kawhi Leonard. And then Kawhi Leonard goes down. They come back to not only win that game, but sweep the series. But the way things were going, it looks like they were not only about to lose Game 1, but they were about to lose home court advantage. So for me, it's not just about how much you dominate, but it's who you dominated. That really plays into how strong you are as a team, how high you should be on this list. And for that reason, they're just outside of the top 3 for me. Number 3, I've got the 1985 to 1986 Boston Celtics. Remember earlier when I was talking about the 2014 San Antonio Spurs being in the argument for the greatest passing team of all time? Well, this is the other team that people constantly refer to as being the most unselfish and the most beautiful passing team ever. This team was led by their head coach, Casey Jones, who is a Hall of Famer, and they went 67-15 throughout the regular season, and they dominated the playoffs as well. They were first in defensive rating this year while finishing third in offensive rating. They swept the Bulls in the first round. Then, in the semifinals, they took out Dominique Wilkins and the Atlanta Hawks in 5 games. They swept Sidney Moncrief and the Milwaukee Bucks in the Eastern Conference Finals. And then they took out Hakeem Olajuwon, Ralph Sampson, and the Houston Rockets in 6 games on the game's biggest stage. You had Larry Bird, who was quite possibly the best version of Larry Bird that we had ever seen. He was the MVP of the league this year, averaging 26 points per game, 10 rebounds, 7 assists, and 2 steals while having nearly 50-40-90 percentages. You have Kevin McHale, who was an all-star averaging 21 points per game, Dennis Johnson locking down guys on the perimeter, Robert Parrish was an all-star center, and Bill Walton, the great Bill Walton, was the 6th man of the year, coming in as a fantastic relief center for Robert Parrish. And so yeah, this team was just stupid good. They were absolutely dominant at home. Winning in Boston Garden was nearly impossible. And whether you just look at who their leader was, who their star was, how they handled things in the regular season or the postseason, there was basically no weakness for this team. And for me, they're the 3rd greatest team in the history of the league. Number 2, the 2000 to 2001 Los Angeles Lakers. Now, I typically don't see the Lakers being ranked this high on these lists, but I think they definitely deserve it. One of the things that usually holds them back is the fact that Shaq and Kobe's Lakers only had a 56-26 record throughout the regular season. But if you were watching the NBA at that point, then you'll remember that one of the consistent talking points about the Lakers was about them having a switch. They had this switch that they would turn on when the playoffs were coming around, and it seemed like they were in cruise control leading up to the postseason. Well, that was certainly the case, because not only did they go 15-1 throughout the NBA playoffs, but they also won their final 7 games heading into the playoffs. And so this team was on an absolutely dominant run with both Shaq and Kobe dominating the competition. Shaquille O'Neal would just utterly abuse Dikembe Mutombo in the NBA Finals, despite the fact that Dikembe Mutombo was the Defensive Player of the Year that season. And then Kobe was arguably the best player throughout the Western Conference playoffs, although you're really splitting hairs between him and Shaq. They didn't really have a legitimate third scoring option. It was kind of just Shaq and Kobe and an array of other guys who could, fill in whenever it was needed. It was Shaq, Kobe, and a bunch of shooters. Derek Fisher was huge for this team in the NBA playoffs as he hit over 50% of his three-point shots throughout the postseason. They also had Rick Fox, Ron Harper, Brian Shaw, of course Robert Horry, one of the most clutch role players in the history of the league. Now, obviously, their claim to fame is their 15-1 postseason run. The only game that they lost was against Allen Iverson, where he had the most iconic performance of his career. But it's not just that they swept their way through the Western Conference playoffs, it's who they swept and how they swept them. They swept the Portland Trail Blazers in the first round, who they just went to 7 games with the previous season. Then they swept their rivals, the Sacramento Kings, who had Peja Stojakovic, Chris Webber, Jason Williams. Then, in the Western Conference Finals, going up against a 58-win San Antonio Spurs team who had the best record in the Western Conference that year, they not only destroyed them, but they had an average margin of victory that was greater than 20 points a game. The Lakers not only had the most dominant postseason run in terms of wins and losses, but when you look at how they dominated their competition, they legitimately have an argument for being the greatest team of all time. For me, they'll have to settle for second best, because number 1 is the 1995 to 1996 Chicago Bulls. Now, this Bulls team, I think they had everything, and that's why they are number 1 to me. They had a 72-10 regular season record, and the one criticism that I often hear people saying, and I think it's a dumb criticism when you look into it, is they took advantage of a weak era. Listen, since 1989, there was about 4 expansion teams, and 2 of them were legitimate title contenders, okay? Just because the Vancouver Grizzlies exist and because, the Toronto Raptors exist, I don't think that takes away everything from the Bulls' record-breaking season. Even if you eliminate those teams and just prorate the Bulls' winning record to what they would have been, they're probably 71-11. And so it doesn't really make a difference. They're still, at the time, the most winningest regular season team in the history of the league. And then you look at who was on the roster. Michael Jordan, in his 96 form, leading the league in scoring, being first team all defense, just being on an absolute mission, especially after losing in the playoffs last year. They go on to sweep the team that just defeated them, the Orlando Magic. You also had Scottie Pippen. You also had Dennis Rodman. So you had 3 first team all defenders in your starting lineup with this group. And then they're surrounded by an array of shooters. They got Ron Harper, Steve Kerr, Tony Kukoc, and they're coached by the greatest coach of all time. And that brings me to my final point. Not only do I think this team is the greatest team of all time, but look at how many things they are in the argument for having the greatest. The greatest player of all time, Michael Jordan. The greatest scorer of all time, in Michael Jordan. Maybe the 2 greatest perimeter defenders of all time, in Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. Maybe the greatest defensive player in this modern era in Dennis Rodman. Maybe the most versatile defender of all time in Dennis Rodman. Maybe the greatest rebounder in modern NBA history in Dennis Rodman. Then you get into their array of shooters and the depth of their roster and the greatest coach in NBA history. This team wasn't fair, man. And the only point in the NBA postseason where things seem to get a little interesting is after they got up 3-0 over the Seattle Supersonics and seemed to take their foot off the gas a little bit before the Sonics win 2 games, but then they close it out in 6. So for me, I think in many ways, this 95-96 Bulls team is the greatest team of all time. But I'm sure many of you are going to disagree, and honestly, I can make the argument for basically every other team in this top 10. So please, if you'd rather have somebody at the top spot, let me know in the comment section below why, and I might even like your take on it. Thanks for watching as always. Make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and shout out to the members as always. And I'll see you guys in the next video.